Vete Sodales. So, let's talk about virtual assessment. And this is another one of those self assessments. I chose this picture because it's a picture of a town where my family used to live. My great aunt and great uncle lived just outside of Paso Robles, California. And in 2003, after they were gone, there was an enormous earthquake. And this is a picture of some of the damage. So, that building collapsed. Fortunately, it was mostly property damage. But what happens when your story collapses? Do you get trapped inside your story? Or can you escape? And what does it mean when a story collapses anyway? Hopefully, it's not as dramatic as what happened to that building in Paso Robles. But I realize that for many of us, our story about what it means to be a teacher, about what schools are, about what students are, about what assessment is, and planning and teaching and all the other things that teachers do. We had stories about these things, and COVID came along and everything changed. And sometimes it feels like our stories have collapsed. Sometimes there's just a little crack in them, like this picture from New Zealand. But sometimes it feels like that actually collapsed. And if your story has collapsed this year, I bet it went something like this. Looking back, there were some rumblings before. There was some stuff that wasn't necessarily going great. It was okay, but it wasn't great. And you probably were able to tell yourself, well, that's the way schools are. It's always like this, and fill in the blank. October was always a rough month back in the olden days, right? But there were prior rumblings. There were things that really weren't perfect, maybe weren't even that great before COVID came along. And then there was this sudden crisis. All of a sudden, some of us went home on Friday, March 13th, and thought we'd be back in school on Monday, March 16th. And I know a high school that was putting on their spring musical and they had the Friday show, but they didn't have the Saturday show, either of them, or the Sunday matinee. Sudden crisis. And then there's this question of now what? You look around this post collapse landscape, feeling like there's been this earthquake. Some things are just cracked, but some things are just, some things are just collapsed, right? Some things are just gone. And there'll be new things. But what about right now? What do you do when your story and your whole understanding of what it is to be a teacher, what a school is supposed to be, when all of that has fallen down? Well, I think the first step is to safely avoid sharp, broken pieces. Because there are some sharp, broken pieces, and some of us, metaphorically speaking, are cutting ourselves on them right now. We're trying to put them back together, or we're trying to pretend that the collapse didn't happen, but it did. So we got to avoid the sharp, broken pieces. We got to safely exit the building. I mean, back when I taught in physical schools, there was not usually much an earthquake line in North Carolina until one year there was. There started to be more. And this state decided, as it often does, that there should be earthquake preparedness drills to add to all the other drills. So we added in an earthquake drill once a year. And part of that is safely exiting the building. And when do you do that? And how do you do that? And all the other questions that go along with that. What's the building in this case? And what does safely exiting look like? And I think the biggest lesson of an earthquake is don't try to handle the cleanup alone. If everything's collapsed, these folks over there also in New Zealand have got a big crew, they've got some big heavy equipment, and nobody's trying to handle the cleanup alone. Please, please don't try to handle the cleanup alone when your story has collapsed. Now, I have some good news. And the good news is, with everything that everybody's been telling me over the past few weeks, I put together a thing, and it's free, and it's called The Gifts of Your Bad Teacher Story. And that's such an unlikely name that I hope people will say, oh, I kind of want to see what those could possibly be. Like I said, it is free. It costs nobody anything. It'll take about 30 minutes of your time. We'll be live on Zoom because there's a document that we'll look at together. You'll get a document beforehand that asks you to think about some things. And we'll apply the gift of the most unlikely thing, your bad teacher story. Actually, your worst of the worst teacher's story, to get some insights about how to handle a situation that's breaking a whole lot of good teachers and making us miserable and making us just feel awful. There's some other things we'll talk about too. But if you're feeling like I'm stuck, I'm trapped in this story, in the ruins of the story I used to tell myself, nothing fits together anymore, everything's fallen apart, and I'm afraid I'm going to cut myself on one of these broken pieces, please don't delay. Because it doesn't have to be difficult, and it doesn't have to be complicated, and you don't have to do it alone. But to stop doing it alone, you got to reach out. So if you're saying, I know I need this, I really want this, you guys know how to reach me. And until we talk, I hope it's soon if you need that help. This isn't going away, this program, but if you need help, go ahead and get the help now, right? So until we talk to each other again, until we get you the help that you need, take care out there. Walete Sodales.